Don't sign that. That's what the nurse whispered to me while my son shoved a pen into my hand and said I needed to hurry up. My wrist still had the IV drip. My head was foggy from anesthesia. And Mark, my only son, was already flipping the page to where I needed to initial. He smiled like we were at a birthday party. But the nurse's voice cut through everything. Don't sign that, please. Whatever sleep was left in me evaporated in that moment. My eyes locked onto the signature line. My name was already printed there in bold letters. And just beneath it, medical power of attorney, property release, permanent care authorization. I froze. Hey, before I go any further, I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. This isn't just my story. It's one a lot of us are living, and maybe you are too. My name is Elaine Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. I raised a child, buried a husband, and once believed in unconditional love. Today, I no longer do. This story begins on a Thursday. I had gone into the hospital for a scheduled hip replacement. I'd been putting it off for too long, but eventually the pain made the decision for me. The procedure was supposed to be routine, in and out. 3 days, tops. But on day 2, I woke up to my son standing over me with a folder, smiling just a little too hard. He said it was paperwork from the doctor, that it was just a formality. Jessica, his wife, was beside him, pretending to adjust the blanket at my feet. She kept nodding at everything Mark said. He's the numbers guy, she always liked to say. But her fingers trembled every time they turned a page. I looked down and saw 3 yellow sticky notes pointing at all the places I had to sign. Mark tapped the pen against the paper, said I should trust him, said this was to make sure I wouldn't have to worry about anything while I recovered. Then the nurse walked by, young, alert, eyes like she'd seen this before. She glanced at the page, then at me, then back to the page. Don't sign that. She didn't even break stride, just kept walking like nothing had happened. But I felt it. Every hair on my body stood up. My hands started shaking. Jessica noticed. Mark leaned in. His voice was soft but heavy with threat. Said I needed to stop making this complicated. Said Caroline, my granddaughter, was waiting for us to finish so they could take her out for ice cream. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. I told him I was feeling dizzy and needed a few minutes. Mark sighed, said fine. He would get coffee while I pulled myself together. Jessica stayed, but her eyes weren't on me. They were on the papers, watching them like a hawk. I waited, pretended to sleep. Then I slowly pulled the top page closer and read it again. My heart nearly stopped. This wasn't about recovery. This wasn't about care. This was about taking everything. That nurse hadn't been guessing. She knew. And that's when I realized. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. I kept my eyes closed while Jessica shifted in the chair beside me. I could hear the subtle sounds of paper being shuffled, the soft click of her nails tapping on the folder. Every instinct in my body told me to stay quiet, to wait. My head was still swimming from the medication, but my focus had sharpened in a way I hadn't felt in years. I opened one eye just enough to see her lean in and read over the documents again. She didn't think I was awake. Her mouth moved, mouthing words as she read. Then she smiled to herself. Not the sweet kind, the self-satisfied kind. When she stepped out to take a call, I moved fast. My fingers were still weak, but I pulled the top page toward me, just far enough to read the header. Healthcare Directive, Under it, my name. Below that, the words permanent residency authorization and transfer of financial decision-making. It was written in dense legal language, but the meaning was clear. They weren't just planning to manage my recovery. They were setting me aside, sealing it with ink and a notary stamp. When Jessica came back, I pretended to stir. She rushed to my side, her voice syrupy sweet, saying she hoped I felt better, that she knew I was scared, that Mark would be back soon and everything would make more sense once I had some water and rest. I nodded, not because I believed her, but because I needed more time. Later, when Mark returned with 2 coffees and that fake casual grin, I asked if I could speak to the attending physician. I told him I had questions about the documents. He blinked, then laughed a little too loud. Said the doctor was busy, said I should trust him, said I was lucky to have a family that cared enough to handle these things for me. That's when the nurse reappeared, the same one, tall, steady. She came in to check my vitals, but her eyes locked with mine as she placed the blood pressure cuff around my arm. She leaned in and whispered without moving her lips. Third page from the bottom. The signature line is predated. My pulse spiked. She squeezed my hand gently before walking away. I waited until Mark left the room to talk to a nurse at the station. I turned to Jessica and asked her to hand me my lip balm from the drawer. While she fumbled with the cabinet, I flipped through the papers again. There it was, page 9, a signature line with the date already typed in, tomorrow's date. They hadn't just planned this. They'd planned for me to be too drugged to notice. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept my eyes closed while they thought I was out, listening to every whisper between them. Mark said he booked the notary for the next morning. Jessica reminded him that my discharge had already been pushed back by 2 days, so they had to act now before I was considered legally stable. Stable. As if I was a building about to collapse. I thought about Caroline, my granddaughter, 12 years old, sweet, quiet. I wondered what they'd told her that night. After visiting hours ended, the nurse returned. She came in quietly, pulled the curtain, and handed me a post-it note folded in half. I opened it. You're not crazy. If you want help, say the word tomorrow when I do your vitals. I'll be here at 10. I didn't cry. Not then. I stared at the note and thought about how many years I had told myself I was just imagining things, that Mark was stressed, that Jessica meant well, that I was the problem. But that nurse saw it. And now so did I. I folded the note, hid it under my pillow, and started planning. If they wanted a signature, they were going to get one, but not the one they expected. The next morning I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I let them think I was slipping further into whatever story they had written for me. Jessica brought me oatmeal and a fresh copy of the papers. This time, she had a highlighter. Pink. She traced over the signature lines like I was a child who needed help coloring inside the lines. Mark wasn't in the room yet, but I could hear his voice down the hall, laughing with a nurse about something that didn't matter. Jessica sat down and crossed her legs. She was dressed like she had somewhere else to be. Makeup done, hair curled, like this was just one more thing on her checklist for the day. She placed the papers on the tray in front of me and said it was time. I nodded, like I agreed, like I didn't see her fingers twitch when she thought I wasn't looking. She told me that once the paperwork was signed, things would move quickly. They had already spoken with the hospital about extending my stay. There was a senior living facility nearby, just temporary, just until I felt better. I asked her where Caroline was. She blinked, surprised I could speak, said Caroline was at school. I asked what they had told her. Jessica smiled, but her eyes shifted. said they told her grandma was just tired, that sometimes grown-ups needed help too. I could picture Caroline sitting at her desk, colouring between the lines, not knowing her mother and father were trying to erase someone she loved. By 10 o'clock, the nurse arrived. Kendra. She came in like any other nurse, cheerful and professional, checked my chart, took my vitals, then asked if I needed help getting to the bathroom. I nodded. Jessica stood to help, but Kendra said she had it covered, said I'd feel more comfortable with a nurse. That was all it took. Jessica stepped back. Once we were in the bathroom with the door shut, Kendra turned on the faucet and spoke softly. I called the patient advocate. She'll be here at noon. If you don't want this to move forward, you need to tell them directly. I whispered that they would never believe me. She pulled out her phone and handed it to me. Record a message. Look straight into the camera. Say exactly what's happening. I'll email it to the advocate and document it in your chart. My hands shook as I held the phone. But I did it. I looked right into that tiny lens and told the truth. I said my son and his wife were trying to commit me to a care facility against my will, that they had filled out paperwork while I was under medication, that they had kept me isolated, that I hadn't asked for any of this. I handed the phone back. Kendra looked at me like I had just run a marathon. When we walked back out, Jessica asked if I was feeling better. I said I was. Mark returned around 11. He brought a notary. The woman was in her early 40s, polite but distracted, like she had better things to do than witness a stranger sign her life away. Jessica placed the papers in front of me again. Pink lines, tabs, a pen. Mark leaned down beside me and said it was time. He told me not to overthink it, that he'd already gone through all the paperwork. I looked up at the notary, then at the nurse station, then back at Mark. I picked up the pen, I uncapped it, and then I said, "No," loud, clear. Jessica froze. Mark narrowed his eyes. The notary stepped back. I said I wasn't signing anything, that I wanted the patient advocate present before anything moved forward. Kendra was already moving. She called over another nurse and asked for security on standby. Jessica tried to laugh it off, said I was confused. But I looked at the notary and said if she witnessed this signature under pressure, I would report her personally. The notary picked up her folder and left. Mark stood stiff beside the bed. His voice dropped low and hard. Said I was making a mistake. I said I had made plenty, but I wasn't making this one. He turned to Jessica. She didn't move. Then he looked back at me and said we'd talk later. But I knew we wouldn't, not the way he meant it. He walked out without looking back. Jessica followed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the power settle back into my own hands. They didn't come back that afternoon. Not Mark, not Jessica, not even a text. The silence was thick, but it gave me room to think. For the first time since the surgery, I could actually breathe. Kendra came by around 5. She sat at the foot of my bed, her tone quiet but focused. She told me the advocate had submitted an internal report to hospital administration. The notary also called back to say she would be filing a formal statement, confirming that I had been under visible duress. Kendra said this wasn't over, and she was right. I nodded, but inside, something was already shifting. I didn't just want to stop them. I wanted to expose them. I wanted it documented. That night, I asked Kendra to help me do something else. I told her I wanted a voice recorder on me at all times. She said the hospital didn't allow covert recordings, but she could leave her phone in my drawer during visits. I agreed. When the night nurse came in for checks, I asked if I could speak with the hospital chaplain. I wasn't religious, but I needed a witness who wasn't on anyone's payroll. Someone to hear what I had to say. She nodded, made the call, and 20 minutes later, a kind-looking man in his 60s sat beside my bed. He asked me if I was in pain. I said no. He asked if I needed prayer. I said not exactly. Then I told him. I told him about the folder, the documents, the way Mark had smiled while I was still groggy and trying to sit upright. I told him about the predated signature line, about Jessica's steady manipulation, about Caroline's name being used as leverage. I didn't cry. My voice was steady. When I finished, he asked if I wanted him to speak to staff. I told him no. I just needed him to remember. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Mark's voice outside my room. He wasn't shouting, but he wasn't quiet either. He was talking to someone at the nurses' station, something about misunderstanding, exaggerated stories, temporary stress. Then he walked in like nothing had happened. "Morning, Mum. Thought I'd drop by before work." He brought flowers, white tulips, my least favourite. I didn't look at them. Jessica wasn't with him. He said she had an early shift. Then he sat down and started chatting. Small talk. The weather. The news. How Caroline was doing at school. I stared at the wall. He kept going. Finally, he leaned in and said we needed to talk like adults. That yesterday had been a mistake. That he was sorry if things came across wrong. He just wanted to make sure I was safe, cared for, protected. I asked him who the house was going to if I had signed the papers. He paused, said that didn't matter now. I asked who told the hospital I had cognitive decline. He stood up, said I was tired, said we could talk later. But I told him to sit. He did. And I told him everything I knew, about the nurse, about the notary, about the advocate. His eyes shifted. His smile cracked. He asked if I had proof. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for my water and took a long sip. Mark leaned forward again. "You don't want to turn this into something ugly." I laughed. Just once. Quietly. Too late for that. He stood, face tight, voice flat. Then he left. No flowers. No goodbye. I watched him walk away through the glass, his shoulders stiff, his head low. And right then, I knew something else. He wasn't done, not even close. But neither was I. The next day started quiet, too quiet. Nurses came in and out with the usual routines, but something felt off. No one mentioned Mark. No one said if he'd called or checked in. Even Kendra looked tense when she passed my room. I didn't ask. I just waited. Around noon, a woman I didn't recognize walked into my room. She wore a navy blazer, held a slim leather folder, and introduced herself as Ms. Rayner from Hospital Risk and Ethics. Her tone was professional, her expression unreadable. She said she had reviewed the internal report. She said there had been a series of complaints submitted about my care. One of them claimed I was suffering early cognitive decline. Another stated I had become combative. She paused, looked me in the eye, then said these complaints had come from my emergency contact, Mark. I asked what that meant. She said that since I was still considered mentally competent and medically stable, I had the right to change my emergency contact at any time. I said I wanted to. She handed me a pen and a form. I listed Clara, my younger sister in Vermont, even though we hadn't spoken in years. Anyone but him. As she filed the document into her folder, she told me something else. There had been an attempt to access my medical records from outside the hospital. Someone had tried logging into the patient portal multiple times over the last 48 hours. The system flagged it. She didn't say it, but I knew it was Mark. That evening, Jessica showed up. She came alone, no makeup, dressed like she wanted to look helpless. She stepped into the room, stayed standing. She said she just wanted to clear the air, said she never meant for any of this to happen, said she loved me like her own mother. I didn't speak. She sat in the chair beside my bed and pulled something from her purse. A photo. It was of Caroline. My sweet girl. Jessica placed it on my tray and said Caroline was asking questions. She wanted to know why Grandma wasn't coming home, why no one was talking about the hospital anymore. I picked up the photo. Jessica said she didn't want things to be messy, that we were family, that we should forgive each other. I asked her when she decided to help Mark lie. Her eyes flickered. She said it wasn't like that. Said Mark was stressed, said they were worried. I told her I had seen the papers, all of them, that they had planned this, that I wasn't confused. She didn't deny it. Instead, she lowered her voice and said something that chilled me. You don't want to be alone. Nobody does. I let that hang in the air. Then I asked her to leave. She stood up, adjusted her purse, and walked out without another word. That night, I sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling. The pain in my hip had dulled, but something sharper had replaced it. A cold understanding. They weren't just trying to manage me. They were trying to erase me. Everything I had built, every sacrifice, every piece of my life they benefited from meant nothing now. They wanted the house, the money, the control, and they were willing to bury me in a hospital bed to get it. But I was no longer the woman they thought they had broken. The next morning, I called Kendra and asked her for a favor. Something simple. I wanted to know if the hospital had security footage from patient rooms. She said they did. Audio? No. Video? Yes. I asked her to check one clip from 2 nights ago. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and left. 20 minutes later, she returned. She told me there was footage of Mark adjusting the tray over my bed, moving the folder, guiding my hand while I was still groggy. She said she had already flagged it and filed it under my record. I thanked her. And then I made a decision. If they wanted to use this hospital to stage my disappearance, I was going to use it to stage my return, on my terms. By the time the weekend rolled in, I had already turned my hospital room into a war room. Quiet, simple, nothing dramatic. But everything I did was intentional now. I requested my meals directly through the nurses instead of letting Jessica call them in. I had the nurse manager remove Mark from my visitor list. I asked for my medical summary in print every evening, just to make sure nothing changed behind closed doors. Kendra brought me a burner phone. It wasn't fancy, just enough to make a few calls. I didn't tell her what I planned to do with it, and she didn't ask. The first number I called was my old friend Terry. She used to work in case management for a senior care nonprofit. I hadn't talked to her in years, but she picked up on the second ring. When I told her what was happening, she didn't pause. She said she'd be on the first flight out from Denver. Said she had seen this kind of thing before. The second call I made was to a woman named Rachel. I met her once, years ago, at a fundraiser for elder abuse prevention. She ran a blog called No More Silence and had spent the last decade exposing family-level financial coercion cases. I didn't ask her to write about me. I just told her I had something she might want to look into. The third call was the most difficult. I called my sister Clara. We hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since the Thanksgiving where she told me I babied Mark too much, and I told her to leave my house. She answered like no time had passed at all. I said I was in the hospital. She asked if I was dying. I said not yet. Then I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she asked for the hospital name and said she'd be on the road by morning. That night, I slept without needing a pain pill. The next day, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't a nurse. It was a woman in a grey cardigan and slacks, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as an intake coordinator for a local memory care facility, said she was here for a pre-transfer evaluation. I didn't react. I simply asked her who scheduled the appointment. She paused, checked her clipboard, and said the request came from a family member. I looked at Kendra, who had just walked in with my chart. Kendra stepped between us and said the appointment would not proceed. The woman tried to push back. Kendra told her that any further contact with me would require clearance from risk and ethics. The intake woman backed out quickly. Kendra turned to me and said I had 30 minutes. I asked 30 minutes for what? She smiled and said the legal advocate was on her way up, and I might want to freshen up before she arrived. When the woman arrived, she brought a folder an inch thick. She laid it on my tray and began reviewing it with me. Every line of every form they had tried to push, all of it tied to emails, timestamps, and internal flags. Then she said something I didn't expect. The hospital board had been notified, and if I chose to file formal action, I would not be alone. I asked her what the odds were that Mark and Jessica would try again. She said they already had. She opened her laptop and showed me a screen. 2 separate emails sent from Jessica's account. One to a facility administrator, one to a personal injury lawyer. Both made it sound like I was unfit to live alone, that I was suffering memory gaps, that I was a danger to myself. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I looked up and said I was ready to go public. She nodded. That night, I wrote the first version of my statement. Not just a complaint, a record. I wrote it clearly, plainly, as if I was telling it to someone sitting right across from me who still believed in family. When I finished, I folded the pages, put them in an envelope, and handed it to Kendra. I told her to give it to Rachel from No More Silence. Then I asked for my discharge timeline. Because I was done waiting, it was time to move. 3 days later, I was discharged, not to a facility, not to some transitional rehab center. I walked out of that hospital with my cane in one hand and a folder in the other. The folder held every document I needed: copies of emails, printouts of form submissions, witness statements, a copy of the surveillance report, a notarized record from the ethics investigator, and tucked in the back, a photo of Caroline I had asked Kendra to print from the hospital files. Terry met me at the curb. She had flown in 2 nights before and stayed nearby to help coordinate what came next. She didn't ask how I was. She knew better. Instead, she opened the car door and handed me an extra phone, said I'd need a clean line. She had also rented a small apartment on the edge of town, just for a week. She knew I wouldn't go back to the house yet. Said I needed a place that didn't smell like fear or betrayal. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and read through everything one more time. And that's when I found it. Buried in the email thread between Jessica and the injury attorney, there was an attachment, a medical power of attorney document, but not the one I'd seen in the hospital. This one was dated 2 months earlier, with my forged signature already on it. I checked the metadata. The document had been created on Jessica's work computer. The hospital incident wasn't the start, it was the final move in a long game. I printed it and added it to the file. The next morning, Terry drove me to a meeting Rachel had set up, a local journalist who wrote for the Tribune. Name was Danny, early 30s, sharp as a razor, eyes that didn't blink too much. She'd covered elder abuse cases before. She asked for the full story. I gave it to her. No edits, no dramatics, just the timeline, the documents, the details that couldn't be dismissed. She asked if I wanted to be anonymous. I said no. She asked if I wanted photos included. I said yes. When the story hit the paper 2 days later, it spread faster than I expected. The headline was simple: Son and daughter-in-law Attempt to commit elderly mother under false medical claims. Below it was my name, my photo, my words. And just like that, the silence was broken. I received 15 emails in the first hour, some from strangers, some from old neighbors, one from a woman who used to attend the same church as Jessica's mother. But the most surprising one came from the hospital itself. A senior board member emailed me directly. He said they were conducting an independent review of all patient family complaints over the past year, said that what happened in my room should never have made it past intake. The next day, Clara arrived. She walked through the apartment door, carrying a box of donuts and a manila envelope. She hugged me like she had been waiting 10 years to do it. Then she handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from Caroline. It was only a page long, but it hit harder than anything in the Tribune ever could. "Grandma, I miss you. I don't understand everything, but I know you didn't leave me on purpose." I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it next to the folder. Later that night, I asked Terry to help me do one more thing. I wanted to file for a protective order, not just to keep Mark and Jessica away, but to make a public statement that what they had done wasn't just hurtful, it was dangerous. She made the call. The lawyer said he could meet us in the morning. And as I lay in bed that night, I realized something that made my chest ache and swell at the same time. I wasn't just surviving, I was building the record that no one could bury. This wasn't revenge, it was memory, and I was the one writing it. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. I sat in the waiting room outside the clerk's office with the folder on my lap and Clara on my left. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Just being there was enough. The lawyer Terry had found was already inside, filing the request for the protective order. He was young, quick, and knew exactly what kind of case this was. He had seen too many like it. He told me we had more than enough evidence. By noon, the judge signed the temporary order. Mark and Jessica were legally barred from contacting me or attempting any further medical or financial decisions on my behalf. I didn't feel joy when I saw the stamped order. I felt clean. I handed a copy to the courthouse clerk, another to my lawyer, and took the last one home with me. That night, Rachel called. The Tribune piece had sparked something bigger than she expected. A regional news channel wanted to do a segment. She said I didn't have to appear on camera. I said I would. The interview was scheduled for the next afternoon. They met us at a neutral location. I wore a dark sweater and kept my answers simple. I let the facts speak. The papers, the emails, the video stills. I didn't add commentary. I didn't blame. I explained. When the segment aired 2 nights later, I watched it from the apartment couch, hands folded, eyes steady. The anchor read my name clearly. They showed my hospital room. They outlined what had happened. And then came the part I wasn't ready for. A statement from Mark. Written, polished. He said he loved his mother deeply, that there had been misunderstandings, that the family was going through a hard time, that everyone had made mistakes. He never once denied the documents. He never once addressed the forged signature. I turned off the TV. The next morning, a letter arrived at the apartment. No return address. Handwritten envelope. Inside was a single-page letter from Jessica. It wasn't an apology. She wrote that everything had gotten out of hand, that I had embarrassed them, that Caroline didn't need to see her family name dragged through the news. She wrote that I would regret choosing strangers over blood. I folded the letter in half and placed it in the bottom drawer of the nightstand. I didn't need to read it twice. At noon, Rachel called again. She had received a message through her site. Another woman, same state, same last name. It was Mark's first wife. They had divorced 10 years ago. She had stayed quiet for most of that time, but after reading the story, she wanted to talk. We met her 2 days later in a cafe across town. She was tall, lean, soft-spoken. She wore a wedding ring from a second marriage. She brought records, court documents, bank statements, a copy of a restraining order she had filed in 2013. She said Mark had tried to place his own father in a long-term care facility the same year. Said he had taken out a line of credit under the man's name. Said he had a pattern. That day, I added everything she gave me to the folder. Then I made a decision. I called the producer at the regional news station and asked for another interview. Not a follow-up. A live panel. I wanted to sit down with people who had lived through what I had lived through. The station agreed. They scheduled the taping for Saturday. 5 guests, all older, all women, all with stories like mine. We talked about guilt, about silence, about the slow erosion of trust inside a family. I didn't cry, but I listened. Every voice added another brick to the wall I had been rebuilding inside myself. And when the host asked what we wanted to say to anyone watching, I said this: "You are not being dramatic. You are not imagining it. And you do not have to explain yourself to people who profit from your silence." When the show ended, the lights dimmed. The crew clapped politely. But I felt something real settle in my chest. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was structure. And I was building it brick by brick. It had been 4 weeks since I left the hospital. 4 weeks since I'd taken my life back piece by piece. And now I was sitting at my old dining table again, not in the main house, but in the back cottage I used to rent out. Terry had helped me get it cleaned up and livable. The furniture was bare, the air was quiet, and that was exactly what I needed. I hadn't stepped foot inside the main house since I returned. The locks had been changed, the alarm code wiped. I didn't want to walk through the same front door Mark used to slam on his way in. I didn't want to see the walls where Caroline's drawings used to hang, not until I knew they hadn't been weaponized. That week, I started working with a local community group that focused on elder independence. No one called it recovery. No one used soft words. It was plain and real. There were women in their 60s and 70s showing up to learn how to handle online banking, revoke bad power of attorney agreements, or just speak up without apologizing. I kept my name off the official list. But people recognized me. Some had seen the interview. Some had read the article. Some had been quietly waiting for someone else to say it first. One afternoon, a woman named Nora came up to me after the session. She didn't say hello. She just said her daughter had taken over her credit cards last year and that she felt stupid. I told her she wasn't. I told her she was early. Most of us don't figure it out until after we've been bled dry. She nodded. Then she sat next to me and didn't move for a while. That evening, I got a call from Clara. She said Caroline had sent a letter. She hadn't opened it. Said it was addressed to me. The envelope came the next day. It was written in purple marker. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. The handwriting was messy but careful. It said she missed me. It said she didn't know why her parents were angry. It said she wanted to see me, even if just for 5 minutes. I didn't call. I didn't write back right away. I let the letter sit on the counter for 3 days before I could even look at it again. Then I made a copy and tucked the original into my folder. The next week, the community group asked me to speak. Just 10 minutes, no camera, just my voice. I told them I had no qualifications to lead anyone. I told them I was still angry, that I was still learning how to exist without defaulting to guilt. But I also told them I knew what it felt like to be gaslit inside your own family, to be told you were imagining it, to feel insane while the rest of them nodded at each other behind your back. And then I said this: The hardest part isn't the loss. It's realizing the people you raised are capable of planning your erasure while calling it love. After that session, 3 more women asked for help filing revocations. One man cried in the parking lot. Back home, I sat on the porch of the cottage with a cup of tea and the heater on low. The wind moved through the trees in a way I used to think was lonely. Now it just sounded clean. I still didn't know what would happen with Mark and Jessica. The court date was set for late spring. They hadn't responded to the protective order except through their lawyer. No apology, no message. I didn't expect one. I didn't need it, because the silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like room, and I was learning how to fill it without asking for permission. Caroline showed up on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't hear a car, just the soft knock on the cottage door and the sound of shoes scraping the concrete step. When I opened it, she was standing there in a too-big hoodie, her backpack sliding off one shoulder, her hair tied back like she had rushed. She looked up at me and didn't smile, just waited. I stepped aside. She walked in like she'd been here 1,000 times before. She didn't look around. She didn't ask to sit. She dropped her bag on the floor and stood in the middle of the room. She said she had taken the bus, that her mum thought she was at a friend's house, that she only had an hour. Then she pulled something from the front pocket of her hoodie. A drawing. It was a picture of me, not from memory, from one of the news photos. Sitting in the hospital bed, eyes forward. Except in this version, I was wearing a crown. A paper one, like the kind she used to make from construction sheets. I took it from her hand and stared at it. Caroline said she had watched the interview. Said she didn't understand everything, but she knew I hadn't lied. I asked her if she was safe. She nodded. Said her parents were angry all the time now. Said she wasn't allowed to say my name. I told her I missed her. She said she knew. Then she reached into her bag again and pulled out a small photo album. The cheap plastic kind from a drugstore. Inside were snapshots. Me holding her when she was a baby. Her sitting on my lap in the backyard swing. The 2 of us at the farmer's market. She said she kept the album hidden under her bed. We didn't hug. Not then. It was too loaded. But she sat beside me on the couch and leaned just enough for her shoulder to touch mine. She asked if we could still talk. I told her we could write. I would get a P.O. box. She could mail things from school. I wouldn't tell anyone. She said she didn't want to be part of the fight. I said I didn't either. I just wanted to keep one thing real. After 40 minutes, she stood and put the album back in her bag. She looked taller than I remembered. Older. At the door, she turned and said she didn't blame me. Not for the house, not for her mum crying in the kitchen, not for her dad yelling about court dates and betrayal. She said she knew I had done what I had to do. I told her she was braver than most grown women I knew. She said maybe. Then she walked out the door and down the street. I didn't follow. Later that night, I placed the drawing in the top drawer of my desk. It stayed open a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I closed it and turned off the light. Some bridges burn loud, others just go quiet. But sometimes, a single voice walks across the ashes and reminds you that something still lives, even if it's just a girl in a hoodie carrying truth in a backpack. The court date arrived on a grey morning in early spring. I wore a navy coat Clara had given me and carried the same folder I had kept since the hospital. Everything was in there. The forms, the forged signature, the hospital footage stills, the statements from the notary and the nurse, the record from the prior restraining order filed by Mark's ex-wife. Nothing flashy, just facts. Terry sat beside me in the front row. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. One of the Tribune reporters sat in the back, scribbling quietly. Mark and Jessica entered together, both dressed neat and neutral. Jessica didn't look at me. Mark did, just for a second. The judge called it procedural, nothing dramatic. My protective order remained in place. Their attempts to gain financial control were declared invalid due to coercion and misrepresentation. The judge stopped short of criminal charges, said it was a civil matter for now, but referred the case to another court for further review. Afterward, Mark's lawyer approached mine and offered a conversation in private. I agreed. We stepped into a small room behind the courtroom. Mark stood across from me, hands clasped. His voice was lower than I had ever heard it. He said he didn't come to fight. He said he had been wrong, not just about the paperwork, but about the way he'd handled everything since Dad died. He said he was scared, said he had gotten used to the money I gave, said he thought it was just part of how families worked. I told him it wasn't. Not anymore. I told him trust doesn't grow back once someone tries to sell it. He nodded. For once, he didn't try to explain it all away. He said he had started therapy, said it wasn't about fixing things with me, said it was just something he had to do for himself. Then he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check. It wasn't much. It wouldn't undo what had been done, but it was something. He said it wasn't about making peace. He knew better. He just wanted to give back what he could. I didn't cry. I didn't forgive. But I said thank you. That afternoon, I walked out of the courthouse with my name and decisions still my own. That was all I wanted. Later that week, Caroline called from Clara's house. She said she had seen her dad cry for the first time. Said she didn't know what came next, but she hoped one day we could all sit in the same room again. I told her maybe. And for the first time, I meant it. The sun came out the next morning. I took my tea outside and sat on the porch, watching light fall through the trees. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them, not at myself. I had done what I needed to do. I had held the line. And somehow, through all the cracks, something soft had survived. Not everything needs to go back to the way it was. Sometimes the win is simply choosing what gets rebuilt and what gets left behind. And I chose both. I'm thankful you stayed with me through this. If you've ever faced something like this or watched someone you love struggle through it, you're not alone. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if this story reminded you of someone, send it their way. Maybe it's time to speak up. Maybe it's time to start over.